Hello and welcome to Dice and Demons. I'm Emma, and in this video I'm going to show you how I paint the new Norn Emissary from Games Workshop for the Tyranids. And I was actually sent this model for free by Games Workshop to try and paint, but it just took me so much time to paint because it's actually a really big model and it has a lot of really nice details that I wanted to spend some time on that I didn't get it done in time for the release. So this is a little bit late, but I hope you are still going to be interested in watching me paint it in, of course, very bright colors. So I start off, as you can see, with a model that's been primed using a white primer, and this one is White Scars from Citadel. And then I paint the carapace or the armor plates or whatever you want to call it in a contrast paint that's called Eldari Emerald. And then I paint the more like the bone structure or sort of the rib cage and stuff with another contrast paint. And this one is called Achillean Green, which is sort of, it's a little bit more of a turquoise color, though it looks a little bit more just plain dark gray here on camera, but it is a little bit more of a turquoise color. Once that is all dry, and you need to be a little bit patient because it needs to be completely dry before you do this, otherwise it'll just end up being a complete mess. Trust me, I've tried it quite a few times because I'm not very patient. I do dry brushing with just a white paint, and this is because I want to do sort of a slap chop method where you have like a darker undercoat underneath for instance, a contrast paint or a speed paint from Army Paint or whatever you're going to use. And a lot of times you'll see people do this with just black and white paint, but I prefer some painted, like colored undertones. So as you can see here, I have some turquoise and some green, and then I'm going to be putting different contrast paints on top of that, and then just using the sort of the light and shadow that the original coat of paint and the dry brushing gives me to sort of enhance the look of the contrast paint that I'm putting on top. So here I'm using a pink contrast paint, and this one is called Volupus Pink. It's also from Citadel. And the reason that I'm using a green undercoat for this instead of, let's say, something that was purple or blue or even just a darker pink, is because I like the sort of contrasting look that it gives, and it just gives a little bit more vibrancy and a little bit more visual interest, at least to my eyes, than if I used, let's say, a gray undertone for just, enhancing the sort of difference between light and shadows that I would give from the contrast paint over on top of, let's say, a dry brushing. So I try to do the same here on the ribcage, where I use a color called a Griff Charger Gray, and it just didn't work out the way I had thought it would. I thought I could just do the slap chop method and then put the contrast paint on top of it, and then it would just be more or less ready to go. And I just thought it looked uneven and splotchy in a way that I didn't like. Sometimes I don't mind, but here I did mind. And so I decided to just repaint the entire thing. And so I grabbed a dark purple color, and this one is called Midnight Purple. It's from Vallejo. And I painted that on top of all the sort of skeletal parts of the entire model. And it was, I kind of hated myself a little bit doing that because I knew this was going to take a lot longer than I had at first anticipated. But I just didn't like it. And if you have like a gut feeling that something is wrong, then you're just better off, doing something different, right? And then I grabbed another color. It's also from Vallejo. It's called Steel Gray, and I used that for painting the bones. And I just decided that I wanted that to be sort of the main color of the bones, and then later on I could apply a little bit more shadow, just mixing in a little bit of black with the steel gray for the shadows, and then using a lighter gray color for the highlights. And the lighter gray color I used was called Glacial Blue. It's also from Vallejo, and this was quite a time-consuming process just because, it would have been so much easier with the gray slap chop, but as I said, I didn't really like it, and so I had to do something different. And I thought I ended up with something that was a lot more clean to look at and did not take away the attention from the carapace, which is what I wanted. I wanted this to be sort of a more or less like a neutral background that would just be there and not be in the way of the brighter colors I wanted to apply to the carapace. So I think it was worth the time, though it was it took just a little bit of time convincing myself that this was actually the right idea. With the skeletal parts all painted up, I could finally start working on the carapace, which is what I had been looking forward to the most. And so I grabbed a color from Vallejo, and this is called Warlord Purple. I think it's a little bit odd because to my mind, to my eyes at least, it looks more like a deep pink color than a purple color. But I mean, the color is really nice and very deep and vibrant, and I really like it. It's a new color I just bought. And I use that to just paint all the raised areas on the carapace. I'm not looking for going for a naturalistic look or anything here, of course, but still I wanted to make sort of sense visually when you just quickly look at the model. So I tried to just hit all the raised areas and highlight it with this Warlord Purple here. Next up, I grabbed one of my favorite paints, which is Pulse Wave Pink from Huge Miniatures. It's a fluorescent paint, which means that, of course, it just looks really nice and bright when you're using it under a normal light, but it'll also glow under UV light, which is just completely useless, but very, very cool and very fun. If you also want to grab some fluorescent paints, I highly recommend the Huge Miniatures ones, and I'll leave a link to their web store in my show notes. And I also have a coupon that'll give you 5% off if you decide to buy any of the paints, and at the same time you will also be supporting this channel. I was in the middle of highlighting everything when I just got the feeling that some of these shadows were just not deep enough, dark enough. So I grabbed some black contrast paint, and this one is called Black Legion, which is the darkest of the black contrast paints. And I just applied that as carefully as I could to some of the recesses, just to make sure that I would get as much contrast between light and shadow as I possibly could. And as you can see, I tried to be careful with it just because, I didn't want to overdo it, and I also did not want to have to repaint all the highlights I had already painted once. I then carried on highlighting, and for the next step I used another paint from Huge Miniatures, and this one is called Cyber Pink, and it's just a lighter version of the Pulse Wave Pink, and it just sort of really helps you get some nice vibrant pink highlights. I try to be just a little bit careful with it just because I don't want to overdo it and end up with something that looks like it's just like pastel pink. I want it to look like it's more like a deep dark pink that just goes up into some crazy bright highlights, if that makes sense. So at least that's what I'm trying to achieve. I'm not sure I always just hit exactly the right spot, but I mean, it's a work in progress, and at least it's always very fun to experiment with highlighting stuff with pink. It's just, it's fun in and of itself, right? Next up, I really wanted to add just some even more vibrant highlights, something that would just really drive home the contrast between the black in the recesses and then the sort of brightest points of the carapace. And I, of course, considered just mixing in a little bit of white with the pink color I had just used, because that would, of course, lighten it all up. But I also thought that it would, again, make it look a little bit too pastel, perhaps. So I ended up mixing the pink color with a neon yellow color called Starfire Yellow, also from Huge Miniatures. And it sort of made like, it's not actually orange, but orangey looking color that worked really well as a highlight. Unfortunately, here on my camera isn't that good at picking up the color values on this particular type of paint. But it is sort of like a pink-ish toned orange color that just really sells the highlights for me, at least. Generally, I find that if you use colors that are sort of contrasting colors to your base color, either as highlights or as shadows or both, it tends to bring your piece so much more to life. It's just a lot more visually interesting than if you just stay on just the same side on the color wheel for the entire painting process, if that makes sense. I lastly decided that I just really wanted those highlights, the orangey pinkish highlights, to pop, and so I added just a touch of the Starfire Yellow on its own as the final highlight. Then for the claws, at first I thought I wanted something that was just blue, because I thought it would match well with both the gray of the sort of skeletal parts of the model, and also would be like contrasting, but not too much of contrast for the pink on the carapace. But after I had painted it using the Achillean green contrast paint, I decided it was just too boring, and so I repainted the entire thing. It seems to be a theme here with this model, and I painted it with a paint called Evil Red, and you can't really see it here, it just looks sort of black, but it's actually a very dark red color, as I said, Evil Red from Vallejo, and I thought it would just look slightly off, slightly disturbing next to the pink, because like dark red and pink, they don't really work that well together, and it's also a contrasting color, of course, to the bluish gray on the skeletal parts of the model. I still wanted to highlight it with blue though, and so the color of the dark red highlighted with lighter blue, that is also just slightly off, and it's off-putting, and I thought that actually made a lot of sense for this big model. So I took some magic blue from Vallejo and mixed in a little bit of black color, because the magic blue on its own was too light, and I used that as the first layer of highlights here on the claw. The next layer of highlight was with a color also from Vallejo called Aquamarine, which is, as the name suggests, sort of like a turquoise color. And the thing is, I decided that just going with pure blue would be a little bit boring and perhaps not work that well. And so I decided I want to go in the direction of something that was more green and turquoise. And for that, I thought the aquamarine was like a nice midway point of the highlighting process. Next up, I grabbed a color called Quantum Green, which is also one of the fluorescent paints from Huge Miniatures, and I used that carefully, as you can see here, to apply to the tip of the claw. And it looks quite cool next to the aquamarine and the blue, and then it just looks really off next to the dark red of the base color, and I just quite dig that. I don't often do stuff like this. I tend to try and do stuff that just works a little bit better together, and I think perhaps I should be a little bit more brave in the way I put my colors together, because this is actually a lot of fun. It also takes quite some time to experiment with and get just right, but I think it's definitely worth the effort. And then lastly, just on the very tip, I add some Starfire Yellow just to get it to be like a really nice bright highlight. And here you can see the final result. You'll notice that I use the same colors on his or her hooves as I did on the claws, just because I thought that would tie it all nicely together. And it was actually quite a lot of fun painting this. It took ages, because as you can see here, compared to the Screamer Killer, this is a giant model. It's really, really big. I just wanted to show you how big it is next to other models, because I know that sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to, imagine just from seeing pictures. Here you can see him next to a tiny rainbow termagant or hormagant, I can't remember. One of the tiny Tyranid ones. And here you can see him next to my Demon Prince, and like the edge of the tip of the Demon Prince wings is sort of almost as high as the Norn Emissary, but not quite. So it's a really giant model. He's really big and beastie, and I love it. And of course, as I painted it with some fluorescent paints, as you can see here, it glows under a UV light. And as I said, it doesn't have any practical value whatsoever. It's just so much fun. I save it for last. Until I cannot put the UV light on it until the model is completely done. So it's sort of like a motivation for me to get it completely done, because then I get to see it under a UV light. There is something so fun and magical about it. I just love it. And as always, last but certainly not least, I want to thank the wonderful people who support Dice and Demons over on Patreon. So thank you so much to Thomas Madsen, Scott Broadway, Jordan Hollins, Andrea Correa, Anthony Paul Castro, Queen's Wolf, JJ Walls, Gwenna L, Mola Mola, TJ Kubiak, Mando Project, Starcon85, S. Beer, Economicus, Firelord21, and Elliot Philby. If you also want to help support the channel, you can do so over on Patreon, and I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. So thank you so much for watching this video, guys. If you have any suggestions or questions or anything you'd like me to answer, please leave that in the comment section and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I also, of course, always appreciate it if you leave a like, if you subscribe to the channel, and if you share this video with your friends. Also remember that you can follow me as Dice and Demons over on Instagram and on X, formerly known as Twitter, if you want to stay up to date on my painting projects. So again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!